I think I'll call us to order and welcome everyone. And I will call this special meeting of our Town Plan and Zoning Commission to order on Thursday, May 13th at 7:08 p.m. Chris, do we want to record? I'll start again. Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to call this special meeting of the Town Plan and Zoning Commission to order. It's Thursday, May 13th at about 7:09 p.m. I'm Rob Klee. I'm the chair of our Woodbridge Town Plan and Zoning Commission. Other members of the commission that are with us here tonight are Yoni Samir, Paul Schatz via telephone, soon to be on WebEx, Andrew Skolnick, Jeff Kennedy, and we may have Larry Greenberg joining us for some part of tonight. According to Chris, he's going to try to get on for some amount of time. We have a lot to cover, so I want to make sure we jump in quickly. But let me finish my my front things. First of all, Chris Sullivan, thank you as always for supporting us. We are operating remotely under the auspices of the governor's executive orders to prevent the spread of coronavirus. So we thank everyone for their patience with the technology, and we're going to try to keep ourselves on mute if we're not speaking. We have only one item on our special meeting agenda tonight, which is the work session, the continued work session on the 2 Orchard Road and Open Communities application for a zoning regulation amendment and an amendment to the Town Plan of Conservation and Development. One item, but there's a lot to cover tonight. And Jeff, as we were talking briefly, our goal, we're probably going to be going for a couple of hours here. We have a lot to cover. I think we can try to be efficient. But my guess is planned budget for around 9 o'clock. And we will do our best. The agenda, all the materials related to this application are all on the town website for those who are listening along. Just a reminder, though, to the public, to the applicants, that no one should have direct communications with our TPZ members at any time. This is an obligation that has continued even though the public hearing is closed. We are in our deliberation phase and you still cannot reach out to us directly about this topic. As a reminder, we're within that 65-day window to do our deliberations and render our decision. That 65-day window will close just after, I believe, our next scheduled public meeting, which is at the beginning of June. So as I said earlier, we've been digesting all the information that is on the public record, the materials that are on the website. That's the only materials that we can use for our deliberations. There will be no participation by the public or the applicant in these work sessions either. So to start, and I think Chris has given me the ability to share my screen. Okay. So let's see if I can share. Can folks see the screen that I'm sharing? Get a thumbs up. It's the regulations. Yeah. Great, thank you. I thought I would start here. This is the copy of the regulations that I downloaded from our website from the submissions that Attorney Herbst had included. It's just a copy of the regulations. It's Attorney Herbst is highlighting, not mine. But I wanted to just make sure we're all sort of starting from the same page of where this sort of governing law we talked about last time we were together about 10 days ago, which is Connecticut General Statutes 8-2, which kind of governs how zoning is done in all of our communities around the state and the different types of things that are elements of zoning commission decisions and deliberations. And, there's lots of sort of, broad language in here of the sort of function of zoning and what we can regulate as a zoning commission. The height, the number of stories, the size of buildings, the areas of lots that can be occupied, the density and location of buildings and structures. We can divide our municipality into districts as we've done, and we're going to talk about those as we go through. And the regulations are in accordance with the comprehensive plan, which is again part of what the applicant has asked for us to change. And I want to go into the sort of bottom here, where my cursor, if you can see it, is our regulations shall be designed to lessen congestion in the streets, to secure safety from fire, panic, flood, other dangers, to promote health and the general welfare, provide adequate light and air, prevent the overcrowding of land, avoid undue concentration of population, facilitate adequate provision of transportation, water, sewage, schools, parks, other public requirements. And so those are some of the things to consider. Regulations, can look at things that are consistent with the soil types and terrain and infrastructure capacity. But it also says that regulations shall encourage the development of housing opportunities, including opportunities for multi-family dwellings, consistent with those soil types, terrain, and infrastructure capacity for all the residents and the planning region. The regulations shall also promote housing choice and economic diversity in housing, including housing for both low and moderate income households, and encourage the development of housing which will meet housing needs defined in the state's plan for housing and community development. So to me, I kind of want to start here just to kind of offer sort of my view of reading that is it really has a lot of things that we can consider, and it sort of in many ways seeks to have all those things find the right balance and strike the balance. And I think that's part of what we were talking about last time we were together, where it seemed to be that there was consensus on exploring and maybe finding a reasonable changes to the proposed amendments from the Two Orchard Road folks and the Open Communities Alliance. And I want to sort of, it's something that came up during our public hearing, and we actually asked them directly and gave them a bunch of opportunities for the Open Communities folks to modify their proposal. That's how we normally operate. We have, applicants come in, they want a zoning change, we have a conversation, we go back and forth and have that sort of deliberations. We had Mr. Chalder, who was our expert. We also had Mr. Miller. I believe that was Attorney Herbst's expert. Raised some concerns and some options and some alternatives, but the applicants indicated they did not want to change or revise their proposed amendments. They put forward what they put forward. So we didn't have that customary sort of back and forth and dialogue. So, which is too bad, but that still doesn't mean that we can't have that dialogue amongst ourselves and sort of, we have to we can unilaterally make some of those reasonable changes if that's the consensus of our group. The other thing, and I just, I've already mentioned our expert, Chalder, Mr. Miller, the expert that was hired from Attorney Herbst. And I apologize, it's late in the day. The expert from Open Communities Alliance, whose name I'm now forgetting, and I apologize to him. There were three different points of views. They had some parts that they were in agreement, some parts that they weren't. That is actually part of our job, is to weigh those different opinions and give what weight we want to their presentations and their credibility. We have that ability to do that through our deliberation process. To me, it seemed that there was consensus among the experts is that there is a need. There's a real need for affordable housing. It's a broad need, and there's a need, I believe, to improve our affordable housing opportunities in Woodbridge. But I do like coming back to Mr. Chalder's view of the world of finding that right balance that balances the community, environment, natural resources, public health, public safety, And to me, that is why I started with the statute 8-2, also seems to have that notion of balance, at least in my view, built into it. I think that at the end of last time, we started exploring Mr. Chalder's sort of framework, or at least sort of an organizing tool to help us sort of guide our discussions. I was going to suggest we go back to that, though I may suggest us, instead of going horizontally, we may choose to go vertically through the different zones, because another thing that emerged, at least by my reading, was that there's some within our record from public comment throughout, from the various sort of planners and experts and documents, there is some concern over potential impacts to watersheds, to from either the use of septic systems or for drinking water. And what I liked about Mr. Chalder's framework and organizing structure is it helps sort of break down what areas of town have public water and sewer, and what have private wells and septic systems, and then additionally what is in watershed area. So let me pause there and see if any other commission members had other sort of thoughts or ideas at the outset before I and let me know if you can actually. I'm clicking things over on my end. I don't know if they're showing up. Did it change over to Mr. Chalder's framework? Great. There's that. I guess I'd also highlight the utilities map that we asked be created, which again highlights in this sort of light blue the public water supply area, and in the blue hash marks the places that have public water service. The purple on my screen are areas with sewer, and then within, and underneath you can see our different zones. But that's in essence helps frame the framework from Chalder. So let me pause there and see if there's anyone who has questions or thoughts before we dive in to the evaluation framework. Sorry. So I'm hearing none. Should we go ahead and start exploring the different zones and thinking about possible changes? I'm going to take that one as a yes too, just to keep us moving. So let's sort of reorient. Hopefully everyone had a chance to take a look at the framework and reorient ourselves a bit with it. When I was looking at it for homework, I found it was easiest for me to have kind of the framework plus our zoning map kind of in hand, so I can remember which zone is which. But I would start in essence with so again, as a reminder, our zones are across the top, but where we would normally just have one big A zone, the detail here provided gets at these lines D and E, which is to distinguish between parts of town that have public sewer or public water. And that's why what would normally be all of this is in the A zone is now different parts of the A zone. Some parts of the A zone have sewer and water, some only have sewer, some only have water, some have neither. And then in addition, to the extent that public water supply areas are particularly vulnerable environmentally, there is this two different flavors of our A zones with public water supply. I mean, that serve at our watershed. Sorry, I'm going to try to keep that consistent. A zones that are in the watershed of concern, there is at least one part of that A zone that has public water, and there's the rest that is only basically septic and private wells. So that helps us sort of understand what goes across the top. I'd like to start us, let's try running down the row of the T3D zone. And the other sort of legend here, the green boxes are things that are already currently allowed by zoning permit. The yellow is what the Open Communities folks have asked also be allowed by zoning permit. And then there are some options for us to consider along the way if we choose. So, and feel free to stop me if this is not the way folks want to go, but I think we can kind of look at almost all the sort of T3 zones together, because these are the ones, they're fairly close. They are fairly close together. But let's just start with the sample in the T3D zone and work our way down. Single family buildings are allowed. Interestingly, we don't apparently allow single family with accessory dwelling units in this zone, which seems odd since we allow it almost everywhere else in town. We do allow two family buildings, and the proposal is to allow two family buildings with at least one unit at 60% area median income. And there will be an additional sort of question of allowing that type of development versus the approval process for the development. So let's put that approval process question aside for a moment. But I would, for one, would be in favor of allowing two family buildings with at least one unit at 60% area median income. We already allow two family buildings in this zone. Does anyone have any reactions or thoughts about that?
Agreed.
Anyone else?
That's T3D, right, Rob?
Correct. Yeah, I'm just going down this first column.
Yep, just making sure I'm following you closely. So you're saying two family with 60% affordability?
With at least one unit at 60% affordability.
Thank you, understood.
Sure, why we don't already allow that single family with an ADU in that zone. I wonder why. But I don't suppose it's worth discussing why we don't already allow it.
Well, I mean, we could allow it just to have consistency in our regulations across the board. I would also be fine allowing that in this zone.
Yeah.
So Jeff, I see you nodding. Is that a yes to making the
ADU,
family?
yes. In that zone, yes.
Okay.
And I could just make a point about the ADU is something that we, might as well say it now, right? I believe our ADU maximum is 650 square feet. Correct me if I'm wrong about that.
I don't have that max. It sounds about right. I thought it might have been 600, but
either way, it's 600 or 650 is pretty small.
But again, for me, this is an area of town with public sewer and public water. We already allow 2-family buildings in this T3D zone. I don't see why we wouldn't also have the opportunity for 2-family buildings with at least one unit of 60% area median income housing.
Yeah, it is 600, by the way, but yes.
Andrew or Paul, I know you're still on the phone, Paul.
Yeah, I'm getting close. I'll be there in a couple minutes. So far, at least there's some interest in a 2-family with affordable housing, and sounds like a few folks who want to think about it. So I want to let's keep moving through this just to, walk through this one zone as an example of what may or may not work in this zone. I'm now moving down to the 3 units per parcel, and the open communities folks proposed opportunity housing for 3-family building within this zone. At 1 unit at 60% area median income. There are 2 other options here. 1 unit, so of the 3 units of housing in that multifamily development, you can require that to be in the affordable sort of opportunity and needed 1 unit at 60%, like the Open Communities Alliance folks proposed, and another unit at 80%. So more of a moderate income versus low income. And in essence, 2 of those 3 units in that 3-family building would have to be affordable. So that's line K, just looking at zone T3D. And then there's the line L is a 3-family building using multifamily regulation and specific standards, which then has a parentheses. Those standards are things like density, things like affordable housing set aside, things like impervious coverage, which we had talked about some last time together and was presented by the regional water sort of company as a best practice in thinking about impacts. You really think about impervious coverage and stormwater management. So the way that I read the differences between J, K, and L here, J says there's 3 units, 1 of them has to be affordable. K says there's 3 units, 2 of them have to be affordable, and it puts slightly different flavors on affordability. L says, in essence, you can have that affordability requirement, and we can talk about 1 or 2 of the units, but it looks at sort of other things that you might also want to be concerned about on stormwater management, on impervious coverage, etc. Now, to my read, those things become more and more important as we're heading into zones that are in the watershed area, zones that don't have public water and public sewer. So it seems to me like a nuance there where you could, in addition to allowing affordability and sort of choosing what flavor of affordability, 1 out of 3 or 2 out of 3, you might add additional regulatory requirements that would probably make sense where you're recognizing the sensitivity of the environment and the ecosystems to that more dense development. So, again, I'd entertain sort of people's views on, in this zone where we have public water and sewer.
Right. So
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jan.
in T3D, which is such a tiny little sliver of our town, you know, if you look at the next page of this evaluation framework, right, and there's that little on the top left corner under case studies, it talks about how T3D is this 4.8 acre parcel challenged by shape and topography, and you know, you could in theory do this and you could in theory do that. I guess, has Mr. Childers proposed, or are you discussing any specific regulatory requirements, any of these specific standards that we would, if we were to adopt L?
So maybe I'll ask a clarifying question to Mr. Chalder to make sure I was understanding the difference between K and L. So if the way I was reading, well, J, K, and L. J and K would be to craft a new, take what Open Communities has presented, make reasonable modifications to allow for affordable multifamily 3-unit housing we're just focused right now on the T3 zone. And between J and K, it's our choice of, is it 1 out of 3 affordable or 2 out of 3 affordable? L would have that similar affordability choice. We'd have to pick a flavor, but would then add, and it can't have more than X percentage impervious cover, and it can't have, it must have stormwater management, bioswale, other sorts of things, and might have a sort of density requirements. Am I reading that correctly?
I think you are, Mr. Chairman. I think the regulatory framework here would give the commission the ability to do those types of things. The interesting thing about the T3 district is that it can be subdivided at the present time. So as Amir pointed out, that 4.8 acre parcel could be subdivided and somebody could choose to build 2 families with no affordable units. So if the commission felt that they wanted to establish some sort of affordable housing set aside, a multifamily regulation in this situation might be desirable for a developer to have a common area development, parking lots, as opposed to a roadway. And the commission could have an affordable housing set aside, which might actually produce affordable units rather than a subdivision into 2-family housing.
Right. Thank you for that clarification.
But explain me what affordable housing set aside means, as opposed to, what does that mean exactly?
It would be a percentage requirement for, much like the applicant has requested. It's a percentage of affordable units.
Got you. Okay, that's what I thought it meant. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And another clarifying question, Mr. Chalder, these case studies, and let's focus in on this T3D case study. This is a representative parcel in that zone, or is this the only parcel in that zone?
I think I had indicated in my March 18th presentation that where I had gone through zone by zone, that most of the land in the T3D zone has been subdivided into smaller lots. There are a couple of parcels that are a little oversized and might have the potential for additional development in the future, but it's modest at best. This is really the only parcel in the T3D zone which has development potential of really any size.
But if someone, but no, I appreciate that. Thank you. If someone chose on an existing lot to, well, they may just not, the lots may not be large enough for a 3-family development. I was thinking probably more of a 2-family development, that you might be able to have a lot which as a single family might be able to turn into a 2-family.
Mr. Chairman, because of the parking requirements in the regulations, 2 units on a 4,000 square foot lot starts to become a challenge based on the provisions in the regulations in terms of where the parking needs to be or can or cannot be. So that is limiting. Parking is a limiting factor in this situation.
I appreciate that. And Larry, welcome. Good to see you. I hope you're feeling okay. And I also know that we're happy to have you as long as we can have you. So, but thank you for coming. You may be on mute. And Paul, it is good to see you as well out of your car. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So again, back to the T3D zone. Because of the limited number of, and maybe I'll just sort of complete the thought running down the column of the T3D zone. Again, in the 4 units and above per parcel category, again, the applicant wanted to have at least 1 unit out of the 4 at 60% of area median income. That was the M in the yellow circle here. But there are options if we were interested in this, in requiring at least 2 units for any 4 unit and above development. And I think, again, according to Mr. Chalder, line O would be looking in essence at what's available in that zone and basically designing a regulation to allow multifamily development in what's available with specific percentage set-asides for affordable housing, plus any other sort of additional requirements as we may want to add on impervious coverage and stormwater and the like. So in essence, and Mr. Schauder, correct me if I'm mischaracterizing this. In essence, we would look at that available, in this case, triangle parcel, and craft a regulation with affordability requirements plus what other reasonable requirements to help make that actually get developed in a way that made sense. Being a little loose with the terms there, but.
Mr. Chairman, I think L and O are potentially the same regulation. It's just depending on the size of the parcel, they might allow for more units. And again, depending on the commission's decision matrix, that same type of regulation could apply to more than one district. So it's concept that multifamily is often described as 3 units or more. So this could be an approach which could apply in more than one zone if the commission wished.
So I appreciate that clarification, because again, that might actually be more valuable to have, particularly if we're looking at zones that have sewer, that have water, and might have some amount of space that would then have if you're going to develop multifamily in those sewered and water zones, here's a set of rules that would apply whether you're doing 3 units, 4 units, or above. Okay, let me pause again there. I'm actually, and I'll say that I'm interested in a regulation of that type that, is thoughtful in having an affordability set aside. To my mind, at least 10%, but I'm interested in 20%. And have that multifamily development regulation apply, whether it's 3 units or 4 units or above. I think that's an efficient and consistent way to apply those types of regulations. So let me pause for thoughts and reactions to that.
I'd agree with that, at least 20% being affordable. So, I mean, to the extent we're actually going to try and craft that regulation, right? We're going to try and do something that could potentially apply to the other zones, some kind of uniform.
Well, yeah. So, zoning, great question and point. I think, to my mind, I've been focused in how I've been approaching this and organizing my own thoughts. I've been focused on, first and foremost, the places with public sewer and public water, which, at least in the T3 zones, which have a few different flavors, are also next to public transportation or most accessible to public transportation. It is the part of our town that has already mixed sort of commercial, other denser type of developments. So for all those reasons, I think that that's definitely a good starting point for this type of more dense housing development, because it fits, to my mind, it definitely fits with that balance. It also, because there's public water and sewer, it has less of a impact on the environmental concerns that we may have in some of our other districts. Though storm water runoff, impervious surface is still a problem even down in those areas. So I think crafting regulations for any development there that particularly, worries about impervious surface, flood water, I think there's an opportunity to be smart about those requirements as well.
Agreed.
So I'll open it up again for others to weigh in.
So I don't have any disagreement with that framework conceptually, Mr. Chairman. I still have some question in my mind as whether it's appropriate to do so in this context with respect to this application. But again, I agree conceptually that what you propose are good ideas.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And I think it's you raise a good question. It's one that I've also been exploring in my mind. And it kind of goes back to the open communities folks put in what they put in, which in essence from the yellow dots are allowing by zoning permit only affordable housing opportunities in every zone everywhere in town. So in essence, to me, by doing that, they've actually opened up every single one of our zones and regulations to their request to have multifamily housing basically everywhere in town. So to me, I think it is taking their request and reasonably tailoring it to the realities of our different zones, which have different conditions and have environmental concerns. So I think we are within our sort of purview. They presented us with something.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that it's outside of our purview or outside of the parameters of the pending application. My suggestion was more to the point that to the extent we make these changes, and based in large part upon the reaction I witnessed a few years ago, that perhaps it should be done in connection with the statutory obligations presented by 8-30J, which set a July 2022 deadline for the creation of a new plan, which would also fit more neatly with the results of the commission recommendations that has been set up by the town. And then we could have a set of public hearings with respect to those proposed zoning changes. That's the only thing I'm suggesting. Not that these changes wouldn't be, in my mind anyway, which is not determinative of anything, that they wouldn't be in keeping with the overall theme of the pending application.
So thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that. But part of so a couple of reactions. We do have an application before us. We do have to act upon that application before us.
We do. We could act up or down on that application as well.
Yes, those were some of our options, but we can also have the option to make reasonable changes and adjustments. And we've gone through a 6-month public hearing process. Have gotten lots of feedback from many of those same members of the public on these proposals and interest in. I would say that there, at least by my reading, there was plenty of interest in doing something and having some adjustments to our current rules, and reasonable ones. And you're right, there is a additional sort of public process that can go forward and will go forward and can look at what we do in this hearing, could make modifications to that if they so choose. The applicants themselves actually recognized that. But I think we've educated ourselves and we've had our experts, we've had multiple experts testifying on all the different sorts of options. I think there's a opportunity to do something with the application that's in front of us. I'm happy to hear other people's reactions on the commission.
Am I hearing Commissioner Skolnick to be saying that you think we ought to have an up or down vote?
I was just saying that I'm not certain that I would be in favor of amendments in this way. I'm not saying I've ruled it out. I was just raising the issues that were on my mind. Now that's not to foreclose anybody else from discussing them and a majority agreeing to them. I was just making my current viewpoint apparent in response to the chairman's question. That's all.
So I guess my specific concern then is, let's say playing this out, we spend the next several hours and then the next whatever, another special meeting, and then the last meeting working through this chart and more in order to craft, you know, applicable regulations across each of these zones. You know, Rob, your point is that we have the mandate and the ability to do that now, and we've had the time on this application. I think the only thing that we haven't had is the opportunity for what feels like the opportunity for specific reaction from the public as to what we would propose tonight and over the next weeks. We don't really have the ability for people to weigh in on that. We have had the public weigh in on the OCA application specifically across all zones and change your plan of conservation development, and people have weighed in pro or against. We haven't heard people say what we're discussing right now tonight, you know, which and I mean I think that's just sort of picking up on what I'm hearing Commissioner Skolnick say, that there's a part of me that's a little bit uncomfortable with that, but there's a part of me that feels like this is actually the probably the only, you know, that it feels like this might be a reasonable way to do it. So I'm okay with continuing, is my point.
As am I. I'm not suggesting we not continue.
Other reactions or thoughts? Jeff, go right ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciated your opening remarks and your preamble and taking us through some of your thoughts regarding all the material and the specific application. I agree with you. I think we're like-minded that Woodbridge needs to be more compliant with state law, make an effort to do the right thing, both in the law and just what's right, doing the right thing. I feel a little bit restricted inside of an application, this application, where we might not get town leadership, economic development commission feedback, more outside professionals, and some of frankly, our own fact checking on going through what we're doing right now. So I feel a little bit constricted by working within this application. But to your point, and to be fair to the applicants, the town has gone through some of these things before, and there haven't been any changes for the public good that have come out of, you know, these different discussions. So I'm in favor of moving ahead and hearing what you have to say in the different districts, but I'm concerned that we may not have sufficient public opinion or public comments specific to changes we would possibly do tonight, and also even have the opportunity to fact check, which we're not. We're limited. It's a tremendous amount of material, but we can't independently try to fact check and work together and talk to each other because we're inside of an application. That's not meant to say that I'm trying to be exclusionary or limit the process. In fact, I want to have this process happen, which is what you're doing, and I'm following you along in it. But I feel constrained as well. All of that said, if you'd like to go through this and, you know, talk about the changes to the districts, I want to hear what you have to say. I just feel a little bit constricted as well. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Anyone else want to share thoughts? Because I do think there will be value in trying to go ahead and sort of walk through the potential changes that are direct reaction to the Open Communities submission. This goes back to my frustration with the applicant, where they weren't willing to actually engage in that dialogue about these types of options during the public hearing process. They weren't willing to in essence, do as almost every other applicant looking for a zoning rule change does, to have a discussion and actually have a collaborative sort of approach. Just because they didn't do that doesn't mean that we can't do that. And to me, I view this as an opportunity to fix what I view as some holes and some significant ones in our existing regulations. And I do recognize that the town has started, I believe it was in the record as well, the notice that the town has created its task force. It's going to have a process that's going forward. And that process, to me, can look at what we do and build upon it, modify it, and adjust it as they see fit. I kind of think that we actually have gotten some really good material submitted to us in this very large body of material that would give us an opportunity to make a step in the right direction. I think some pretty meaningful steps in the right direction on a journey that is going to then continue and frankly would be handed over to that task force and the ongoing processes. That's my 2 cents. All right. So I think where we last left off in sort of my review of the Chalder sort of framework and with the clarification about the ability to craft a multifamily regulation with standards that I offered between 10 and 20%. It sounded like Yoni was in favor of a 20% affordable set aside. To my mind, that would be an interesting proposal, particularly for our zones that have access to water and sewer for those larger multifamily developments. So in essence, what part of where we're headed, if we're headed in this direction tonight, if we get to consensus on things that we would like to see written down on paper, that is, at the end of the night, I'm kind of skipping ahead to, what we would in essence charge Mr. Chalder with the assistance of our attorney would be to task them with, in essence, doing a red line. So editing the Open Community Alliance's submission of their proposed regulations with reasonable changes that we support. A reasonable change that I'm putting on the table is for our zones in the T3D, T3C, T3BB, at least, and maybe even the A that has access to public sewer and public water, and maybe the B, which I don't fully understand that one, that there be created a multifamily development regulation with standards that would have density requirements, a 20% set aside, and some limitations on impervious cover, recognizing the concerns over flooding and stormwater management. I think, and just to go down to the T3D as that one triangle-shaped parcel, TC3, the case study, and just Mr. Chalder for clarification, your case study here. This is an example of an existing development in the T3C zone, are there other parcels that could take advantage of this multifamily development regulation?
Mr. Chairman, most of the parcels in the T3C zone are not of sufficient size to take advantage of this situation. This case study here in the T3C zone is the town elderly housing projects, which has 30 units on 2 acres or a density of 15 units per acre. So I provided it for reference purposes for the commission. Sometimes density numbers aren't always clear by, just a number. So you have to kind of look at it. And again, the only thing that's a little bit different here, and this goes back to my earlier remarks, I think in the March 18th presentation, elderly housing doesn't have as many parking spaces as a regular unit might have. So this can be a little deceptive in terms of the density or the apparent density. But this is here just for commission's reference as to what this might look like.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. And the T3BB does have some larger parcels in it that could be opportunities for more multifamily development. And in essence, we would have to set a reasonable sort of density in terms of units per acre for those. I mean, again, if we were coming up with a multifamily affordable development regulation that was applicable across different zones, it would have one standard or one density.
I think that would be something for the commission to consider. I think going back to the concept of balance, we'd want to balance stormwater management, impervious coverage, and those other types of considerations as part of that type of regulation. Particularly in this case, I believe it's roughly a 12-acre parcel, mostly flat. And there are some other parcels in the T3BB which are long and are deeper than they are wide. And the possibility with assemblage of some of those parcels is you could make a much more developable piece. And that's something also for the commission to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Chalder. Okay. So I guess anyone have any other reactions or alternatives to think about in the T3, let's group them together, the T3D, T3C, and T3BB, that whole sort of suite of zones. I think back to kind of where we started, single family is allowed everywhere by zoning permit. Right now we have inconsistency in that we allow accessory dwelling units in one of the T3 areas, but not in the others. I would propose, if it's within, the umbrella of increasing housing opportunity and density, to at least make that consistent. I don't know why we don't have it across all of ours. I would also propose in the T3BB allowing 2-family buildings and 2-family buildings with at least 1 unit affordable. So again, in essence, making the T3 zone consistent in lines G and H, and adding in the 2 units per parcel category the opportunity to have affordable housing.
Yeah, I concur.
And then once we're above 2 units, we're in the 3 and above world. I believe having a multifamily regulation with specific standards that has a 20% set aside, that has and recognizes the challenges that we face in terms of flooding and stormwater runoff, So finding a reasonable impervious coverage limit and sort of stormwater management best practices. So Attorney Dubuque, the question is, if we're asking that, do we need to be more specific in our ask to Mr. Chalder? Do we need to say we would like a density of 15 units per acre? We would like an impervious cover requirement of X, a minimum or a maximum amount of impervious cover. Do we need to come up with the percentages precisely and then have Mr. Chalder draft the regulation accordingly?
Yes.
Yes.
And then once the regulation comes back the next time around, you could refine it, but you shouldn't have blanks and just kind of leave it open-ended. I think it would be more productive if you try to just come up with something now, and then you can think about it in the meantime, and again, refine it perhaps next time when it comes back on paper.
I'm now trying to recall if the letter from the Regional Water Authority, did they have a suggestion on impervious cover, or did they just like impervious cover regulations? I forget whether they had a no more than 15 or 20% number in their letter. Should go find, but it's hard to with my fingers, right? And I'm sharing my screen, so it'll jump around if I'm. And I'm correct that we don't currently have impervious cover regulations in our existing zoning rules, do we?
That is correct. And I'm going to refer you to page 2 of 3 of the Regional Water Authority letter. And number 3.
I need to pull, I didn't have that one teed up. Do you remember where it came in? Was it in Mr. Chalder's materials, or was it separate?
Rob, in the Regional Water Authority letter that was submitted, their item 3 on page 2 stated, we recommend that an impervious coverage limit be established over the site's buildable area, in addition to maintaining maximum allowed building coverage of not more than 15%. We propose the buildable area be exclusive of wetlands, slopes over 20%, while it would be more desirable from a water quality perspective for allowed impervious coverage to be no more than necessary, a limit of 15 to 20% impervious cover over a parcel's buildable area would nonetheless be more productive than what is currently allowed.
Thank you, Chris. My memory wasn't too far off. I think I said 15 to 20% there. I just haven't been, I wanted to pull it up for the shared screen. So I can't.
If I email it to you, does that help?
I wanted to link to it right off of the website, but I don't know. Attorney Dubuque, I've shut off my email, so I'm not sharing my email with everyone.
It was read at the March 1 meeting, so it should be with the March 1 materials.
Yeah, I don't. It's not coming up. So if Chris, you could send it to me via email, I will then try to put it up that way. Apologies, I didn't have it. So an impervious. Thank you, Chris. So impervious cover Their range was 15 to 20%. So no more than 15 to 20% impervious cover. That sounds reasonable to me. Well, I mean, it's a question, 15 or 20, we have to pick one. I'd say no more than 20% impervious cover, because that's a big part of why we have flooding problems. So to recap, I would propose modifications to the open communities submission to allow in our T3, D, C, and BB zones the accessory dwelling units just across the boards. 2-family buildings across the board. 2-family buildings with at least one unit of 60% area median income. And then for multifamily to create a new multifamily regulation with a 20% set aside for affordable. Impervious coverage, no greater than 20%. Utilizing best practices in stormwater management. And a density of 15 units per acre. Actually, just curious, what did we approve last time for that other development on the parcel that was across the street from the brewery? What was the density we allowed there?
10.
10? All right, I'll stick with 15.
Is that across the street from the brewery? Isn't that T3BB?
Right. But I'm just saying in general, this multifamily development regulation.
Yeah. Your 20% set aside is at 60% AMI or 80% AMI? 60, right?
I'm open for suggestion.
I mean, 60% AMI is truly more closer to affordable than 80% AMI, given what our AMI is.
But I'm also open to, you can do a split, 60% and 80%, 10% of each.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I'm not opposed to that.
Okay, so 20% affordable, which would be 10% at 60 AMI, 10% at 80 AMI.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Across the top of the chart, right? What does that mean? At the very top, like if I'm looking at, I'm looking right now at the 3 units per parcel, so basically page 2 of the chart, right? I'm not understanding that. Like at T3D, across from where it says 3 units per parcel, it says 3 units at 4,000 square foot equals 32.7 units per acre. And then you just asked the question of what did we allow for the brewery, across the street from the brewery. Was that you said something about it was the number of units per was that units per acre? I'm trying to understand how this is.
So Yoni, that might be a good clarifying question for Mr. Chalder. What does in the italics, which I just sort of highlighted, if I'm still sharing my screen, which I can't tell in WebEx if I still am, what do those numbers mean and how do they translate? The reason I put forward the 15 units per acre for this regulation because it's in keeping with the existing density of that senior development, which Mr. Chalder mentioned was 15 units per acre. But how does that math compare to this math that I've highlighted on the framework?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The text in italics within each of these boxes was meant to provide a benchmark for the commission. So Chairman Clee just highlighted that text in the top left corner of the T3D. Correct. Could you just highlight that for a moment, Mr. Chairman? If in fact there were to be 3 units on the minimum lot size parcel in the T3D, which is a 4,000 square foot parcel, then the density would be 32.7 units per acre. So in other words, 3 units on 4,000 square feet. If you gross that up to an acre, how many units on an acre would that be? The answer is 32.7. If you were to go over 2 more columns, because the minimum lot size in the T3BB district is 9,375 square feet, 3 units on 9,375 square feet results in a density of 13.9 units per acre. So it's just meant to provide a benchmark of number of units relative to the minimum lot size. So I meant it to clarify, and if it confused, I apologize.
So do we need to change the minimum lot size for any of these?
No, I don't think so. I think so within this I think gets back to the case studies within the T3D zone. Yes, you can subdivide it into 4,000 square foot lots if you wanted to, but a developer could look at that parcel and the new proposed multifamily regulation and buy that whole parcel as one parcel and develop it with no more than 20% impervious cover with a density of at least 15 units per acre, et cetera. What it means though is that that, or at least by my reading or understanding, in your typical 4,000 square foot lot in T3D, what does this mean? Would it be hard to put a multifamily?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I think on a minimum size lot in the T3D on 4,000 square feet, it's challenging to get a 2-family house in. So I don't believe on a 4,000 square foot lot, multifamily, it would be challenging to make that work. On the other hand, I think as Commissioner Zamir pointed out, on the case studies, we do have a 4.8 acre site, triangular in nature, which presents its own set of development constraints. In that scenario, multifamily development or multifamily regulation might allow a more creative development on that site. And if the commission's desire is for 20% affordable housing set aside, 20% of the units would be affordable. Deed restricted as
Okay. So to me, that's sort of covers the opportunity in the T3D, T3C, and T3BB zones. I guess I'd now like to move to
perhaps move to the B zone and refresh my. I'm thinking of this as you're heading up Amity Road towards the JCC. This is an area over to the left where there is an assisted living facility, which does have water, and it has public water, public sewer, which went to that facility, but not to the neighborhood that's just nearby it. So this is a place that does not currently have public water or sewer, but could with extensions into their neighborhood.
I believe that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
So if we're going down this, I moved on to B. Was there anyone else who had anything they wanted to add to T3, D, C, or BB? And Mr. Charlder and Attorney Dubuque, did you sort of get the notes or take notes on what it might look like? Okay.
I would just suggest, for purposes of discussion at this point, that to the extent changes are made within this zone, a condition be that any proposed dwelling incorporating those changes make connection at their expense to public sewer and public water.
So that sounds like I think that's a reasonable idea. Is that something, Attorney Dubuque, that can typically be written into regulation, that sort of requirement to have connection?
You could provide that would apply in cases where there is water and sewer. However, the connection is made, whether it's private funds or grants or.
No, I was talking about in this particular B zone where the description was public sewer nearby, public water nearby, that it's not otherwise servicing dwellings in that region at the present time in that district. So that my suggestion was that any multifamily dwellings that might be allowed in that district be required to, at their expense, hook up to public sewer and public water as a condition of obtaining a permit.
So I think, Andrew, you can sort of flip it the other way, and you can have a multifamily development if it is hooked up to sewer and water.
Yes.
I don't think you have to get into how it was paid or not. It just, this would only,
Well,
yes.
I don't want to impart any obligation on the town of Woodbridge to pay for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how or if we can control that through the zoning rules. I think so if it is a multifamily development in that zone, that developer who wants to build let's say we're talking the 3 or 4 unit sort of housing, if they wanted to do that in the B zone, they could only do that on parcels that are connected to public water and sewer. That would be
that no parcels are yet connected to public water or public sewer in that zone, but simply that it's nearby because the utilities pass by on their way to the assisted living facility and the JCC.
So if I may, just by saying it must be connected to public water and sewer does not put the town in a position where they would be obligated to fund the connections. But what I was trying to say before was there might be, it doesn't necessarily, you don't want to specify that the developer has to connect. Perhaps there's other opportunities for, as I said, grants or other mechanisms that might be available.
Perhaps, I guess my concern with the limitation of that language is any suggestion that it would be also a requirement of existing single-family dwellings within that zone to now hook up to sewer and water.
Yeah, Andrew, I don't think we would have to do that. And correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing, this might be, again, building on that new multifamily regulation that we were just talking about for the T3, D, C, and BB zone. A condition of that regulation is that it's only for multifamily developments in areas that are connected to water and sewer. So it could also work for B in multifamily if and when a developer or anyone in B does make that connection.
That's true.
And that wouldn't, since we're in the multifamily, not in the single family part of the B zone, it wouldn't have anything there. Maybe I'm also hearing that you're worried that a developer would come and ask the town, hey, extend that for me, or hey, I want to, can you support? They could ask that now. They could, actually they can't. But I mean, I don't know. I don't think that puts any obligation on the town to actually do anything if someone asks them.
I was just raising the question, that's all.
No, it's a good question. So in B, it looks like there's the opportunity perhaps to have that multifamily regulation with specific standards that applies to the T3, D, C, BB zone and B zone, where the B zone parcels are connected to public water and sewer. So I know I said I was going to go vertically. I'll continue horizontally. There is a part of the A zone that is also on public water and sewer. In essence, the way that I'm now sort of looking at that is the Open Communities Alliance proposed multifamily housing everywhere across our entire town. And where at least I'm coming in sort of my head is multifamily housing where there's water and sewer with reasonable restrictions on requirements on density, a affordable housing set aside, impervious coverage, stormwater management. I am now seeing that as a potential response to their request for everywhere is not everywhere, but here in these zones, the T3D, T3C, T3BB, and A1 that have public water and sewer, and the B zone if it is connected to public water and sewer. To me, there's sort of an elegance and sort of clarity of that there is now multifamily development opportunity in the places in town that have public water and sewer, because we spent a lot of our time over the 6 months talking about the real risks and concerns to the areas that don't have public water and sewer when you're adding density and when you're potentially causing risk to water supply lands.
So if it's gonna have public water and sewer, except for B, where you could extend it to where if you're gonna go into B, then you'd have to at your expense, not at the town's expense, as we clarified, extend to connect it to that development. You're suggesting that across anywhere that there is, if I'm looking at the utilities map, anywhere that there's public water service and sewer, there's got to be both.
Yes.
Mhm. So that's 243 towards the bottom of the map near Woodfield Road.
I just switched over it for everyone if they want to share.
That basically the pink, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
No, it needs to be the pink and the blue crossing each other.
Mm-hmm.
So
this
there's
area, what's the over there? There's a Johnson.
so it's not a lot of
no.
It's not a lot of the A zone.
Mm-hmm.
It is in essence 94 acres.
How'd you figure that out?
It's on his chart. Approximate area of zone. So this is what Mr. Chalder labeled A1, where there's the intersection between sewer, sewer and public water.
Gotcha. So you 93.6 A1, 93.6 acres. Mm-hmm. Just that is Center Farm.
Sorry, I'm jumping around. Do folks have any reactions or thoughts to that? Do folks need a 5-minute break? Bathroom break?
That would be helpful.
Okay. Let's take a 5-minute break, come back at 8:40. Thank you, everyone.
Good.
Looks like we're almost. Looks like we're all mostly back. I apologize. I was trying to eat a little bit of my dinner, so I didn't go in to find that Regional Water Authority letter again. And I know that Chris sent it to my email, but so I'm not sure where it is from the website materials. Looks like Yoni is not quite back. We can wait for him to rejoin. Okay, it looks like we have everyone back. I think so. I think, where did we leave off? We left off with a potential proposal for areas of town that have public sewer and public water to, in response to the Open Communities Alliance's request for increased housing opportunities and affordable housing opportunities, to respond with a modification to their proposal that allows, that modifies their proposal in a way that creates a multifamily regulation with specific standards on density, on affordable housing set aside, impervious coverage, stormwater management best practices in all the zones that have public water and sewer. So that is something that I think is potentially on the table to ask Mr. Chalder and Attorney Dubuque to craft into a regulation. Have we given, through our discussion so far, enough detail and guidance on the specifics to craft that regulation? Attorney Dubuque, do you think we've been clear enough?
Yes.
Great. So I would view that as one. Gosh, that's a long time to get to item one. There is a question. So that is what the regulation would look like. There was obviously a discussion throughout the entire public hearing process over this question of whether that's something that should be had just by only a zoning permit versus something that would have more TPC process associated with it if there was an applicant coming in seeking to take advantage of this new multifamily housing development regulation. I'll offer my 2 cents on that debate that went back and forth. And from all that I heard in the public hearing and in the record, that would be rare, exceedingly rare. And I don't think to allow it just by permit over the counter, or with just the zoning enforcement officer's review and not have the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I think particularly that we would be venturing into something that we haven't done before in Woodbridge. I think particularly at the beginning, having some amount of TPZ process, so we know what's coming in. So we actually have a sense of what this regulation, if it is approved, would be producing, what sort of applications would come in. So that's obviously something that could be adjusted over time or changed over time, depending on how we view the things that are coming in. But I would propose, at least for this new step in this direction, and in keeping with basically every other town in Connecticut, that requires more than just the zoning permit for these types of multifamily developments, that there would be some TPC process. That said, I'd be open to what type of process. We have various flavors, special permits, site plan reviews, etc. And I know just from experience, every time someone wants to build or do anything, we seem to require a special exception. That seems to be our default here in Woodbridge. But I'm open to suggestions. Because isn't that right, Attorney Dubuque? You would need, when crafting that, you would need to know what sort of process attaches to any applicant who would come in under that new regulation.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so I just looked at table 3.1 and almost everything is a special exception.
I would agree, special exception.
Any other reaction?
I would agree, special exception also.
Okay. And I'm fine with special exception too. So unless I'm hearing anyone with a strong view otherwise.
What am I agreeing to? Can you explain that again? I'm sorry.
No, sorry. Yeah. No, so let's say hypothetically, if we had this new multifamily regulation for all of our zones that have public sewer and public water that has been crafted to have affordable housing set aside requirements, impervious coverage, density, et cetera. The applicant comes in, what are they asking for? And our range of opportunities is just a permit or a site plan application or a special exception application. And it seems so far that particularly for me at least, the first time out with this new regulation, having a special exception process for these applications may make sense.
So that means in practice that if they meet, once this regulation gets crafted and then they meet would it be correct to say they meet the bulk regulation requirements? I don't know if I'm using the right terminology. But if they otherwise meet the obligations that we set by the regulation that we're proposing to craft, then they have to come before us and get a special exception from us.
Right.
In order to build.
Correct. Which is how we treated the guy who wanted to do an art studio last week, right? He was in for a special exception. And the guy who wanted to do an auto body shop was in for a special exception. The liquor store had to change the regulations and then come in for a special exception.
Right. But I mean, those examples are obviously not housing, which is, significantly different type of use. If we've created a regulation and the applicant in question otherwise meets the requirements of the regulation that we craft regarding, pervious lot coverage, etc., all things that we craft, we're proposing to still make them come before us and say, here's my application, here's what I want to build. I otherwise meet the requirements. Please give me a special exception. Right?
Yeah, and we hold a public hearing.
And it would give us the opportunity to review each individual application and propose, when warranted, conditions upon for approval.
But again, the conditions that we put on somebody doing an art studio or art fabrication, large scale art fabrication studio, or somebody that's going to do a car repair, don't operate your car repair after 7 p.m. or whatever it is. What kind of conditions will we put on somebody with an application like that? I guess Mr. Chalder might answer that question, right? Would it be like, well,
I don't know if we can ask
a certain number of parking spots. Why can't we ask them that question?
I don't know. Attorney Dubuque sometimes, because
So, Mr. Chalder can only,
So
Mr. Chalder can only provide information that was discussed during the public hearing. He's just here to provide technical assistance, not to introduce any new concepts in fairness to
was this
the
chart
public
before
and
the
the
public
applicant.
hearing, though? Was this chart that he created here, this possible evaluation
Yes.
framework, was that created during the public hearing?
It
So
was,
because that was,
yes, it was.
but this is what we're discussing right now flows from this chart. It flows from the regulation which we are crafting, we're proposing to craft wholly anew. And my question is whether or not, and maybe even you could answer this question, Attorney Dubuque, right? Then what are the what are the, if an applicant does come before us, what are they asking for when they're asking for a special exception?
So if you go to page 100 of your regulations, that has all the special exception requirements and parameters, including conditions and safeguards, and they are spelled out in 6.3c.
So for those who are who may be watching at home, the 6.3c says that in deciding whether to grant a special exception, the commission shall give consideration to, not be limited by the following: the health, safety, and welfare of the public in general, and in the immediate neighborhood in particular, compliance with the plan of conservation and development, the location and size of the proposed use, the nature and intensity of the proposed use, and any operations involved in the use, the safety and intensity of traffic circulation on the site and adjacent streets, the scale of the proposed site and structures, the harmony and appropriateness of the use and site design in relation to the general area and adjacent properties, compliance with zoning regulations, and the site plan objectives set forth in 6.4c. So it would then, with a specific application in front of us, and frankly, in some ways to reduce the burden on Chris, who's a one-person sort of office and show, it would provide us the opportunity to see the full sort of plan for that development, how it's situated. I could think of things like it's sort of, the traffic flow and entry and egress, the screening or of the landscaping sort of requirements, things that I'm now kind of thinking in the, like we were discussing in the brewery context before. Those standard sorts of questions when you're putting something that may be a larger development into a neighborhood, just thinking about ways to potentially soften the edges on neighborhoods, the surrounding neighborhoods in terms of traffic flow or sight lines or et cetera. Those to me would be in those sort of within that scope of our discussion on a special exception. I don't know, Charlie, unless you think that's off.
As with design to a certain respect, I think.
It'd be I don't know how it would intersect with that. Are there the design standards for that part of town? Is that kind of what you're thinking about? Because I know that came up in
Well,
other
certainly we made design recommendations to the brewery application when it was pending. It was later withdrawn, but that was part of a special exception, wasn't it?
Yep.
Anyone on this commission been on it long enough? I don't know, maybe Commissioner Skolnick. When I'm trying to think of some housing to which we applied special exception, we put some special exception demands. The elderly, the not the Linden, but the other development.
The active adult plan development that,
right.
Yeah,
right.
The active adult plan development that was on both sides of Bradley went through that.
Right.
Through special exception.
Yes.
The congregate communities, I'm just looking at table 3. So I assume what's up in the B zone. Was a special exception. And Yoni, frankly, I take it kind of the other way. We seem to apply special exceptions to everything that we do. And maybe that is something as a commission we should be reducing the amount of special exception requirements that we have in general. But it seems to be our standard way
We're
of
not
approaching
doing that
this.
now. But we're not doing that now. We're proposing to add this to.
Right. You know, correct. So and that's why I'm only proposing to have it be consistent with the majority of what we do in town, which is by special exception.
Affordable housing is in table 3.1 to the extent that it's allowed anywhere in our current regs. It's allowed in GBA by special exception, if I'm reading this correctly. Oh, that's accessory dwelling unit.
I mean, if you're on page 21, yeah, we don't allow multifamily dwellings anywhere, which is our problem. The other one,
Special exception, allowing by special exception, is a step in the right direction. Put that in the newspaper. Yeah.
The other option is a site plan review, which we do use occasionally. And the requirements for site plans are in section 6.4, which has the commission reviewing, approving the site plan application. It has the ability of the commission to refer any site plan to any other commission in town that we deem appropriate. And in the review, it has a similar review that we're taking, and I'm looking at now 6.4C on page 103, reviewing a site plan application. The commission takes into consideration health, safety, and welfare, the public in general, and the immediate neighborhood, make prescribed reasonable conditions and safeguards to ensure the accomplishment of the general objectives, that it is consistent and conforms with the plan of conservation development. It promotes public safety. It has traffic and pedestrian access, circulation and parking, landscaping and screening, lighting, public health, environmental features, neighborhood character, drainage, soil and erosion, sediment control, and conformance with requirements. So the site plan procedure is another option if we wanted our review. And in essence, and I just being probably a little too simplified, you need a site plan for a special exception as well. The special exception just has a public hearing component. Am I correct in that? Whereas the site plan does not require a public hearing.
Site plans do not require a public hearing.
Thank you, Chris.
Is that the only distinction in terms of the level of scrutiny?
No, typically site plans are more objective standards, and special exceptions have more discretion built in terms of the requirements are not so fixed. There is a little more room for a site-specific type approach depending on the particular circumstances. Site plans are much more generalized approach.
So I'm open actually to either site plan approval or special exception. Because I think both serves the purpose of having the Planning and Zoning Commission review what is actually being proposed to be built and look at these sort of core features of parking, public safety, traffic, lighting, environmental features, all those things, you know, once you actually have a specific proposal in front of you.
You're in favor of site plan over special exception, you're saying?
I'm not strongly either way. I think they both serve a very similar purpose and would give the commission the ability to weigh in appropriately on those things that are in our regulations, which makes sense for us to weigh in on.
Right, and it turned to rebuke you to characterize, though, in response to Commissioner Skolnick's question about which one imposes greater scrutiny. You said that the site plan is typically considered more generalized, parameters that you would look at for site plan approval. It seems like the site plan requirement is more expansive, right? There are all kinds of things that each site plan should include. The brewery was a site plan. They basically gave us site plan materials, but it was a special exception that they were seeking. Am I understanding that correctly, Chris?
It was a special exception, yes, and because it was a special exception, it included the site plan. It also was in the village district, so it required architectural review, and the village district standards imposed also.
Yeah, so Yoni, the way I'm reading 6.3 on special exceptions, the first thing you got to do when you're applying for a special exception is fill out the site plan forms and approval. So you got to go through all the site plan things,
right?
In addition to the special exception, which, and again, maybe I'm being a little too flippant here, adds a public hearing. Though Attorney Dubuque says that it also has some additional levels of scrutiny for the Planning and Zoning Commission.
You actually have quite the extensive site plan requirements. That's generally not the case. So actually yours are a little bit, now that I've looked at them a little more closely, are a little bit more extensive than I would say most commissions. But generally speaking, the site plan is typically the more routine process.
But we definitely don't make anything routine here in Woodbridge. So
no, but the case law certainly favors the site plan as the more generalized, as I mentioned, approach. There's less time in the statutes for site plan determinations. The special exceptions are generally recognized as requiring a little bit more thought and review.
I mean, it is actually just by number of pages. The site plan goes on for like an additional page or so more than our regulations on special exception. I don't want to get bogged down on this. It sounds like, though, there's a general, so do we have a general consensus that more than just a permit as of right? And maybe Yoni, you might be the one who's hesitant on that.
Yeah, I am hesitant on that. Wondering if we need to revise our site plan standards and procedures.
Again, not something we're going to do in the context of this application from Open Communities Alliance, but that list of things for us to improve and adjust just keeps growing. Our site plan procedures are quite extensive. I don't know if Jeff or Andrew, if you have any feeling or with respect to site plan versus special exception.
Not as between those two, but I would not be in favor of anything less than a site plan review. Not as of right.
Okay. Jeff, any thoughts?
I agree with that. You know, the special exception, you know, you do pull in a little bit more public opinion, and depending on the amount of development or growth that happens and how many folks go in and you know, build these units, if in fact that happens, I think it's good to maybe have some of the public opinion on it from the folks that live in the area, you know, where the development is going on. I think it's kind of fair. I'll also add, you know, if we include special exception now, the commission could at a future date reduce it to a P&Z site plan only, you know, a site review, and make it a little bit easier. But you know, we're contemplating a significant change, you know, substantial change to existing zoning regulations. So special exception might allow us a little bit more control. So I tend to favor a little bit more special exception, but either way, I guess would be all right with me. But those are my thoughts about it.
I appreciate that for both Andrew and Jeff. So in the direction to Mr. Chalder, we're not going to leave it blank, but it's site plan. If you could put a bracket, site plan, special exception in the current sort of draft, and we will choose one as we head down that road. And I tend to fall somewhere probably in between Andrew and Jeff. I don't know. I don't want to speak for you, Andrew. I don't want to put you in one part of it. I got that look from you, Andrew, that I was placing you somewhere on the spectrum, so I'm not going to do that. I think that a site plan, particularly having reviewed our very extensive site plan procedures, are pretty significant in what we require of applicants. But I do recognize, particularly as we're taking this step into a new area, having a public hearing can be okay. Okay.
Rob, is that why I have a question? Is that why we don't require a site plan or a special exception if someone wanted to build a 3,000 square foot house on a piece of property because it's not new? And because we've got, I'm just trying to figure out what the, not the rationale, but so if we're trying to put together procedures for these kinds of developments, what is someone would logically ask, well, how come you don't have to go through these hoops to be for a single family home?
Yeah, no, Paul, that's a good question. I think part of it may be the volumes of single family homes may be a lot larger, and if they all had to come, well, I'm just guessing here, actually. I don't know. Yeah, but that, you're right. We don't require one of the few things we allow as of right and or as through just a permit only is the single family home. If we go back to our table 3.1 on pages 20 and 21.
I would also point to section 8-2 itself, which says that such regulations shall be designed to lessen congestion in the streets, to secure safety from fire, panic, flood, and other dangers, to promote health and general welfare, to provide adequate light and air, to prevent the overcrowding of land, to avoid undue concentration of population, and to facilitate the adequate provision for transportation, water, sewage, schools, parks, and other requirements. And those things, you know, need to be assessed in accordance with our provisions, as far as I'm concerned, on a case-by-case basis.
It also 8-2 also says that the plan of conservation development shall promote housing choice, economic diversity, and housing. You know, if somebody builds a as of right, what is essentially a mansion, I can think of a few examples across town, right? And then they have an as of right, you know, they're as of right allowed to build what they want to build, and they build it, and then, you know, there are a large family living in it, and each one of those members of the family grows up to be an adult, and the next thing you know, you've got, you know, 9 cars. We've probably got a few of those in town. We haven't regulated the traffic. We're not going to. We haven't regulated the unsightliness of it, the impact on the surrounding area, etc. Even when there's wetlands. So I don't know. It just seems like I think we got to be cognizant of that. I'm in favor of some kind of oversight, right? I do agree. I don't want you to think that I don't. But I think we have to be cautious of comparing it to, you know, a brewery or an art fabrication facility. This is housing. So.
And I guess I'll only add that I think what's interesting is that this application has raised a lot of really good, thoughtful questions about other parts of our regulations, and, you know, including, you know, impervious cover. I think that came out as an issue that we, you know, should be thinking about more broadly. That doesn't mean that we'd go and that we have the ability in this, with what is before us, to go do that in all of our zones and to start, you know, dealing with impervious cover problems across our entire town. But that might be a thing to take up on our own accord in our own sort of revisiting of our regulations, these and other sorts of questions. But we have what we have in front of us. Thank you, Yoni, for. So I still think that, Mr. Chalder, the brackets between the site plan and special exception, but we will pick one of the two. If we go down this is all in the assumption that we head down that road. I guess the next question is there any interest in going into the other parts? Now back, hopefully I don't know am I still sharing the screen? Okay, thank you. It's hard to tell on my end. Is there anything else that we'd want to look at in the A zone, which has the mix of some parts of the A zone have sewer, but are on private wells. Some parts of the A zone are on water, but have septic systems. Some parts of the A zone are on septic and private wells. And then there are the watershed portions, which we've heard in our record have additional environmental concerns for density of development and extensions of development. So do we have thoughts about expanding density in these? I don't know, which would be helpful to start with, the zones that have the watershed. Is there any interest in increasing density in the watershed areas?
I can say I would not be supportive of further expansion, short of recommendations from the task force at a future date.
So further expansion beyond where we've gone so far.
That's my position. Yes.
I appreciate that, Andrew. Others?
That's my position also.
Thank you, Jeff.
The watershed area is defined according to the utilities map, right? That's just so we're clear, right? That's
Yeah,
what you're talking about.
I just
Blue,
moved.
the blue.
Yeah, so I moved over to that in the sharing. This is the area that's marked out by the blue hash marks, and it is shaded, colored in light blue. So you'll see that it kind of cuts diagonally across the town from the north east corner down to the southwest area. Within that light blue shaded area, there are a few places that have public water supply, I guess along Center Road and upper parts of Rimmon Road. And I don't know, maybe way down here has the sewer overlap. Mr. Chalder, I'm not sure. There was a small, well, it seems, oh, no, I'm sorry, we're in the watershed area, my bad. There's only that portion of the watershed area that has public water, but otherwise, everyone in the watershed is on septic systems. So you can see that there's this one bit that's on water. So, Yoni, is that helpful?
Yeah.
And so, Andrew and Jeff, so I am clear, you're also not interested in any additional opportunities in these A zones that are not in the watershed.
Speaking for myself, at this point, I'm not. I'd rather have that go through the processes that the town has commenced in connection with us trying to apply state law or look at options that Woodbridge would have. I would prefer to leave those out. I think the town should look at it, but I prefer that to happen outside of this application.
And as I said, I would not be supportive of any further expansion beyond what we've already discussed, short of recommendations by the designated task force to explore those.
Great, thank you. That helps clarify.
What about Paul? Any word on any position on that?
Nothing that hasn't already been stated. My concern is actually, no, not my concern. My overall objection is that I think it's unfair to any resident in general that they not have an opportunity to comment on what is being proposed that would normally go through a public hearing.
Understood. And Larry, anything you'd like? You may be muted.
I have trouble with the concept that the rest of the zones would not share in the obligation to provide housing, a variety of housing. Given the sophistication of septic systems and well water, I think it can be done in other areas as well.
Thank you, Larry. So here's a question. If we have that sort of, and I do want to know the time. It's almost 9:30, and I'm already beyond where I had hoped for originally. We have this sort of group that we've sort of walked through that have the public water and public sewer, and or it's nearby and could be theoretically sort of accessible. And we walked through, I believe we walked through most of the sort of changes that would allow for consistency in accessory dwelling units across all of those zones. The potential for two-family and two-family affordable, and this multifamily comprehensive regulations for all those sort of sewer and water areas, which actually gets the T3 zones, the B zone, and that one part of the A zone. If we call that sort of group A, I'm like, this is probably not even the right, I don't want to introduce like another letter because we already have A zones, and I apologize. It's because it is getting late. The first group, we'll call that the sort of, where we've had that discussion. To Larry's point, there's this second group, which has watershed sort of concerns and issues, which isn't on public water and sewer, but might be able to have some increase in density. Now, for Jeff and Andrew and Paul, which I don't want to speak for you, let me just stay with Jeff and Andrew. You don't want to go there. You want to stay with the first group and not see anything proposed, drafted for us for a second group.
That is my position, yes. Short of recommendations from the task force to do so,
yeah.
I'm not supportive of that at this point.
Right. No, I appreciate that. The only question is if we may have just lost Larry, which I think he told us he was going to do that when it got to a certain hour, that he may not stay with us for the full time. The question I have, and I was thinking about these zones and the potential for some increase in housing diversity and opportunity. I was interested in what a regulation might look like for allowing 2 units per parcel in the, I guess, according to Chalder's sort of guidelines, the A2, A3, A4, and even into the watershed ones.
I concur with that. And I also want to go on the record saying 2 things. Number one, that I don't believe that we need to wait for the task force, because I think the task force was created as a result of this application, and I don't think I'm offending anyone by saying that out loud. Number 2, I think we need to expand. I think that regulation, and I'm actually, this is actually a question. I'm wondering if the proposal that you're suggesting, Rob, could also include modifying our accessory dwelling unit regulations to increase the size of the accessory dwelling unit from 60 above 600. Sorry about that. So to increase it above 600.
You broke, yeah, you broke up a little, but in essence, make the accessory dwelling unit opportunity more than what it currently sits at. To my view of allowing for a two-family building, I think would actually cover that personally. But maybe our lawyers would tell us differently. But which would, in essence, allow you to split your existing structure into 2 units. Instead of the accessory dwelling unit, which is always from the record, and and I believe Mr. Schultz had stuff on the missing middle, sort of housing. Accessory dwelling units were often smaller. We're like a garage style apartment or whatnot. I think allow for a 2-family. In essence, you could split out an apartment from your ground floor or sort of basement floor. But someone can correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Assuming you're correct, so then across the A zone, you didn't say A1, but across the rest of the A zone, right, across the rest of the A zone, across the entire A zone, you permit 2-family under the similar guidelines of what we were talking about for the T3T, T3D, C, and T3B, B, and B. That's a way to get this accessory dwelling unit accomplished.
And I'm getting, or I'm seeing that Attorney Dubuque doesn't necessarily think that's correct.
No, I think you're on the right track. I just think we'd have to think through that. But I wouldn't recommend any changes to the size of the accessory dwelling unit, because I think that's outside of the scope of a reasonable change. You can do that on your own motion right now. You can ask Chris to put forth a regulation change for your next meeting, and you can set a public hearing and go through that whole process on your own. So I don't think you need to do that in the context of this regulation, and I just want to keep you focused on reasonable changes to this regulation. But I think you're right that if you allow 2 families, then you don't have to worry about the limit on the accessory dwelling unit.
And I think that the 2-family and the 2-family opportunity with at least 1 unit AMI, to have that be a consistent option throughout the town. So in essence, from what we're looking at here, we talked earlier about. So I don't want to put words into our attorney's mouth, but I think we're within our sort of rights. Hey, this is an application that's asking us to increase the housing opportunities, the diversity of housing throughout our town, and their proposal. And in so doing, we saw that, wow, that accessory dwelling unit isn't everywhere in town. It really should be. That's not going in and modifying the 600 should really be 800, or we never talked about that. They did mention, I believe, as part of the applicant's presentation, that the accessory dwelling unit wasn't a really great accessory dwelling unit option. So they did actually raise it in their presentations, both orally, and I'm sure I could find a page, in their 150-page submission where they said that wasn't much of an option. So I think allowing that across the board, allowing 2-family potentially across the board as a housing opportunity increase, and the 2-family with at least one unit AMI across the board, to me could be the group 2 regulation. Recognizing that some of our members wouldn't want to go beyond group 1 without presenting that. But I still like to see what it looks like on paper.
I agree.
Mr. Chalder, did we give, and Attorney Dubuque, did we give enough to craft that, or do we need to think more about even with just 2 units in our watershed areas, do we need to worry about things like impervious cover and those sorts of things?
I think,
That's up to you. I think in terms of what your concerns are for the watershed areas.
Yeah, and so in some ways, I was envisioning, in essence, as people are, as families, evolve, move out, there's potential opportunity to take your existing house and then have the opportunity for a rental apartment, which would be in the same footprint. So it wouldn't change very much. But this regulation would also allow for new development to have a new structure built. So we could add impervious coverage limits similar to the ones that we've asked for in the multifamily housing development. And I'm a fan of impervious coverage limits for some of the reasons that were highlighted in the letter from our regional water authority, as a way to try to get at some of the environmental challenges that can arise from denser development. So I'd be okay with mirroring those impervious cover limits in our watershed area for this 2-family development. Yoni, I don't know if you had a reaction to that or others.
Could Mr. Chalder lay out some possible suggested ideas for impervious coverage limits? I mean, I'm with you on that, particularly down in the T3 area, regarding impervious coverage and considering the history of stormwater runoff problems that they've had there, and the management of the water runoff. I mean, I'm just not educated enough to know if it's improved at all with the construction of the Merritt Street Bridge, and if there's been any improvement there. But it seems like there might, we would rely upon someone like Mr. Chalder to suggest what we want to.
Yeah, I don't know if we're allowed to at this stage for this of kind of where we are, which is very site, which is also site specific. We're also, in some ways, impervious cover kind of manages 2 problems. One, in more densely developed areas, it helps reduce flooding, stormwater runoff challenges that we face in that part. In the watershed area, it is also impervious cover tends to gather oils, contaminants, et cetera, and then runs them into our water supply. It's a different related sort of problem, but I think it operates differently for the watershed area versus an area where you're concerned about flooding. I think that having a consistency in impervious cover makes sense, at least to me, for treatment of different zones in a similar fashion. And it also is following the recommendation of the water supply company.
I agree with that.
Okay. And I think, again, for me, having the language where this would be through, in brackets, either site plan approval or special exception. Are we missing anything? Any blanks? Yes, Mr. Chalder.
Chairman, I think in your desire to not confuse the terminology. I just want to make sure you talked about group 1 and group 2. Could you just run those, summarize those again so I make sure I have those right?
Sure. No, and I appreciate that. So group 1, which we spent the majority of the beginning of the meeting on, was a set of regulations sort of addressing the T3D, the T3C, the T3BB, the B, and the A1. So all the areas that have public sewer and public water, and treating that as a group. Places that already have that infrastructure, plus, they tend to also, at least for parts of it, have closer access to transportation, et cetera. And as a requirement, which is why B is a in or out, these rules would apply only to places that have made that connection to public water and sewer. And that would be a regulation that would, at a minimum, include this new multifamily regulation with specific standards on density at 15 units per acre, on affordable housing set aside of 20% affordable, of which 10% is 60% AMI and 10% is 80% AMI, and a 20% impervious cover.
Got it.
To just so we're all clear, in the world of the 2 units per parcel, in that same group, we wanted to be consistent in our accessory dwelling units, which just has odd missing, circles where everywhere else it applies. And then I guess this is the question on the 2-family. Would that again be allowed in all of those areas with sewer and water? And the 2-family, I'm looking at H and I of your chart, in 2-family with at least 1 unit, 60% AMI. That's a question, because I know it's late, and I want to make sure that we're clear in what we're tasking Attorney Dubuque and Mr. Shalder to do. So I think that's what we talked about. I'm not hearing anyone saying that was not what we talked about.
I think I have enough, Mr. Chairman, to put together a regulation for the commission's further review. So I'll take a shot, and I can come back to this meeting and listen to it again if needed.
Right. So that's
that is what we talked about, by the way, in the last 2 hours.
Great. Thank you. So that's group 1. Group 2 would be to focus in on the 2 units per parcel and basically have that be an opportunity in all of our zones. Now, if we did both of those, it would probably need some smoothing to make that all sort of, figure out how those both would apply to each other. In this group 2 regulation, the additional caveat of a impervious cover requirement, at least in the watershed areas, though frankly, and Yoni, since we might be the only 2 who are interested in seeing this, I'd be okay having that impervious coverage applied across the board.
What does that mean? Applied across the board,
So instead of just requiring or having impervious coverage limits in the watershed areas, it would also have limits of impervious coverage in the A2, 3, 4, kind of all through the A zones. Again, to try to tackle runoff and the general environmental problems of impervious coverage.
Hey, Rob, where is A1?
So A1, while you're thinking about that, A1 is, can you see this, Paul?
Yeah, I've got the map up on a different screen that's much bigger. So
Yeah, A1 is literally this kind of blob here where the sewer and water collide. So it looks like,
it looks like it's down Center Road by Rice and North Pease.
yes, just basically on the way to, I assume that's just on the way to the high school. So, no.
Okay, that's that kind of unusual shape.
Yeah, and there's another part right here at the lower end of Beecher Road where you have both water and sewer.
At the lower end by Manville?
Yeah, basically right across from Beecher School.
But Mr. Chairman, the those two areas you've identified, yes, fall within the mix. There actually are some slivers over next to the B zone and other places where the underlying color is white, but there's the blue-red crosshatch. And so that also contributes to this a little bit, but they're again adjacent to existing development, and of course water sewer is available there. And the other thing I wanted to remind the commission of, that in this map, in the making of this map, we have taken the water lines and the sewer lines and buffered them out by about 400 to 500 feet to provide an area or a sense of properties which are adjacent to. But the sewer lines and water are served by pipes, and the lines don't actually go out that far. So you can envision that the water or sewer pipe is centered in that, and therefore the acreages are estimates based on the overlap of a buffered area. So it's not precision. It is an indication townwide of where these facilities exist.
And thank you, Mr. Shaw. That's a helpful clarification. It also, I think, aligns with the crafting of the language to basically allow it where there is actual connection to sewer and water, which is in keeping with the B zone discussion we had earlier. But you're in essence also saying that parts of that A zone may not actually be connected yet. So back to Yoni and the impervious cover, whether that should be applied across the board sort of question. I don't want to overly complicate matters. But
no greater than 50, no greater than 20%, you said. Something like that.
Something like that, yeah. And right now, our maximum it's late in the night for this sort of question, and I apologize if I'm opening a can of worms. The maximum building coverage in Mr. Chalder's framework, what does that refer to?
Mr. Chairman, that is, according to the zoning regulations, the maximum building coverage that's permitted in each of the zoning districts. Maybe a reason perhaps that we might want to have some flexibility in the commission's further discussion on the percentage of impervious coverage. Because if you were to do 20% impervious coverage across the board, it's less than the currently permitted building coverage in some of the zoning districts. And so I think conceptually, as the lot size gets smaller, the same amount of development would consume a larger percentage of the site. So yeah. I think if you'll, I think I understand the commission's desire and intent here, and I think what may make sense to attempt is to look at the building coverage in the zoning districts and put together information for your further review and discussion.
I think that would be helpful on that intersection between building coverage and impervious coverage. Okay, so I think we all need. I think that's it. Unless there's anyone else who wants to add anything further about this group 2 proposal, I think it will be helpful to actually, when we do see it, and I think hopefully Attorney Dubuque and Mr. Schalder have enough direction from us to craft group 1 and group 2 sets of regulations that in essence redline the open communities proposed regulations, so we can look at them and tee them up for further discussion. And then I think Attorney Dubuque, you would have to turn those into a sort of motion for consideration and voting. If we feel we are at that, have we reached that stage? Not tonight. Reached that stage to we've come up with 2 options or 2 proposals to move forward on, to have drafted into real language to then digest and discuss at our next meeting.
Right. So just let me remind you, there were a couple of other points that Mr. Chalder raised in his March 18th presentation about other sections that perhaps could benefit from some clarity. In particular, definitions. He had some ideas about definitions and the affordability plan, changes that might strengthen that part of the regulation. So perhaps Mr. Chalder can be tasked with adding those recommendations, because they're already in the record, into the red line of the regulation, and then you can just decide. You'll see them at that point, and you can decide whether to incorporate them or not, rather than to try and start discussing all of them now. And
yeah, no, I think we're about discussed out.
Well, that was what I was thinking, but they were specifically discussed in the record. So if you would just like Mr. Chalder to do that, to incorporate them, and then you can decide which to pick or choose, or you could reject certainly all of them in your discretion. And then the only other thing, may I just remind you that there is a second application, and that is the POCD. So perhaps you could just spend a moment on that.
Yeah, so I think that's, so on the first, I think having Mr. Chalder include some language that addresses some of the issues he raised in his March 18th presentation, which I have generally up on the screen now, but it's accessible on our website if folks want to take a closer look at that. He's going to kind of hopefully make the regulations a bit more workable, is kind of the goal, and offer us some language with options to do that. Thank you, Attorney Dubuque, for reminding us that yes, there's also a proposed plan to conservation and development amendment. I think that and we should talk about this briefly, in essence, that amendment can reflect and incorporate the things we've been talking about so far today, tonight's meeting, and frankly the meeting on May 3rd as well, about improving, consistent with 8.2, kind of in some ways similar to the language there about housing opportunity and diversity of housing and housing access. So I think that, again, that's always been the second fiddle in this whole application, is that plan of conservation and development amendment. But I'd love to see some language if folks on the commission are interested in language that is consistent with the balance that I think we've been trying to strike here. I'm not hearing any objections, so I think Mr. Chalder going ahead and incorporating the notion of balance and reflecting steps that we're taking in the right direction. Okay. Do we feel that we're going to be ready to make our final decision on June? I'm going to stop sharing. That's better. I think I can see you all better. Do we feel that we need another meeting, or can we go ahead and do this? Have our final meeting. When is our final meeting?
June 7th.
June 7th. Do we want to have another meeting before June 7th? I know how much you guys like hanging out together in Zoom world, not eating dinner. And what are folks' thoughts?
I'll say this. How soon before the next meeting would we actually get to review the proposed changes in the zoning laws and, in the regular, like, are we going to get them the day of the meeting, or can we, which makes it a harder time to review, or are we going to get them a few days before? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question, Jeff. And it's that may actually, before we answer that, another question is, how long do you think it would take to actually craft, so some time has to be taken to do that. That may lean towards, and I know this might be, apologies in advance, having one more special meeting, which could just be even a presentation of the proposed amendments and some discussion, but not necessarily a final decision, and save that for June 7th. And I offer that as an idea, which I'm not necessarily wedded to.
So, Rob, don't we need to know when the proposed changes might be available before you can even make a determination if we have time for an interim meeting?
Yeah. Attorney Dubuque, sorry to put you on the spot.
Mr. Chalder, what do you think? Would be a reasonable period of time, because again, it's, a lot of different pieces have to fit together. So I don't want to put Mr. Chalder on the spot either, but
I think realize the yeoman efforts that commission members have been putting in with this application, the number of meetings and everything else. I think while I've taken copious notes and listened attentively to what the church has talked about this evening, I'd like to have an opportunity for you to review the work product. It would seem to me that I think I can have a work product ready in, let's say, a week for distribution to the commission. And that could put us into the week before Memorial Day weekend for a meeting. Because I think Memorial Day, complicates matters. So I will do what I can do to get everything together, both on the amendments to the regulation and the plan of conservation and development by the 20th or the 21st. And then I think if the commission that week, if the Monday the 24th or Thursday, the 27th would work for me. I'm not sure if they would work for the members of the commission.
I'm available the 24th, not the 27th.
Other members?
I'm available either.
It should be available both.
I'm available both as well.
And the 25th is not an option.
Fortunately for me, it's not, Rob.
That's okay. I think I can do both. So Jeff, I'm sorry, which one could you do and which one couldn't you do?
I can do the 24th. On the 27th, I'll be out of the state.
Okay, it looks like it's the 24th. I might need to check on something on timing or coverage. Yes, I'm not sure if it's going to be a 6 o'clock or a 7 o'clock.
I definitely won't make, I'm flying home that day. So I definitely will not make anything early. I'm not sure I'll make anything later, but definitely won't make it early.
Is there conflict with any town meetings because you need the capability?
Chris, yeah, we're sorry, we forgot to ask.
There shouldn't be any issue. We do have a young gentleman who assisted us before, and I'm pretty sure he should be okay, although Pua is on board, so let me check with Pua.
What's the chance that we'll be back to in person after the 19th?
I have not heard. Pua, do you know if you can have coverage for us on the 24th?
No.
Okay, thank you.
And Paul, so later works better for you?
I can't.
Or are you not sure that you'll be able to make it at all?
So I know early doesn't work because I don't think I can't find I'm looking for my flight information. I don't have it, but I know that early is a no is for me. I mean, don't obviously continue with everybody else. Early for me is a non-starter.
So let's at least at 7 at the earliest, and I needed to check I do have another meeting that night, which I'm going to try to get coverage for. So it might be 7:30.
That's okay.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Any other Attorney Dubuque? Anything else we need to do before we let everyone go?
I think you have everything covered.
Great. Huge thank you and appreciation to Chris Sullivan and team, to Attorney Dubuque and Mr. Chalder for all your help and guidance and support, and then obviously to our commission members for your thoughtful approach and stick-to-itiveness and the seriousness with which you've been addressing all this. It is commendable, and I know that these are long nights, and we've had quite a lot of them. But it is, I do sincerely appreciate all of your efforts. So we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And I'll second it. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
No one's opposed, no one was abstaining. Good night, everyone. Be well.
Thanks, Rob. Nice job.
Thank you.